Hi, I'm Deb McIntosh and welcome to UpFront. Today I'm thrilled to be with Mayor of Castlegar, Kirk Duff, and we're going to talk about some highs and lows of the past year. It's been a long year.
Yeah, it has. Well, the 7.5 months that I put in.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall it's been a long year.
Yeah. It's been a long decade.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Kirk, we want to know some of the highs, the lows, some of the things that you want to talk about, maybe correct some of the misinformation that's out there, or just talk about the highlights if you want. And then I have some questions that I'm going to give to you to answer.
Sure. Well, the highlights obviously are the adoption of the housing strategy, the adoption of the downtown area plan, and the starting of the process for the official community plan to get reviewed. Along with that is the zoning bylaw review. Massive undertakings for a year, 2 years ahead of us.
Yeah. So you say the official community plan. Now, unless you've been involved in that, you sort of hear this and you think, okay, what is it? And how do I get my input into it? And is it about sidewalks? Is it about buildings? Is it about parks? How does the average Joe on the street be involved in that?
Well, it's about everything in the community. It's, as it says, official community plan. So it sets out the overall principles and guidelines for how we would like to see our community grow and develop itself, and how we like to see things maintained. And it covers basically everything. And as the process gets started, everyone's going to be informed of how to get involved. Because what you'll find is once a plan is formulated by those that are involved, gets adopted by council, and then that's the basis under which the zoning bylaw gets adjusted. So whenever we talk budgeting, excuse me, whenever we talk budgeting, everything in our budget is a reflection of all these plans that we have, items that have been reviewed and discussed with various volunteers and community members. So what goes into the planning step is what shows up in the budget and on the strategic overall long-range plan. So getting involved at the beginning is the best way to get some input.
So if I came to you and said during the process of the official community plan, my concern is in the winter is snow removal. Will that be addressed?
It's being addressed now. You know, we always say that we put more money in the budget in a reserve, snow reserve, and this year's a good reason for it. Unfortunately, this much snow in this short a period of time has created the challenges that everyone has noticed. When it's difficult to keep ahead of your own driveway, then it's not any different for the city. And we typically aren't going to go out and hire double the crew and then lay them off afterwards. So it's all about planning again and having the priority list. And when the snowfall first started 3 weeks ago, whenever it was, we were lucky to get off of Columbia Avenue and the hills. So when people say, how come you haven't come to my street yet? Well, that's why. And my street was not the first one to be done either.
My street was done on the 15th, just before the 15th of December, and then once in the new year. So
yeah.
I understand what people are going through as well. It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
And it's scary to be out there and go through like that.
Yep.
So as a taxpayer then, when the official community plan, my thought is you go in there, okay, well, what have you done for me so far?
Well, the thing about the recreation side of our community is that's not only what maintains our current level of population, but it's what helps attract people to come here. Because no matter where you get a job in the Kootenays, now in the Tri-City area, you don't have to live where your job is. You can live anywhere you want, and you can still get there in a reasonable time. Maybe not at this December, but so we have to have the recreation, the leisure side of the plan. We have to really keep developing it, because that's what's going to make the difference in a lot of cases between which city this person's going to, or family's going to pick to live in. So you may not have kids anymore, but if you want to share the tax load across a wider tax base, then you need more taxpayers. So that means a growing city and all the challenges and good things that come with that.
And years of benefit.
And years of benefit going forward.
Thanks, Kirk. One of the questions I was put forward to me to ask you is mandatory vaccinations. So is the city, or has the city already implemented a mandatory vaccination? Where are you guys on?
We have not implemented mandatory vaccinations, nor are we going to. Right now, we have determined that our mitigation plan that we set up at the very beginning when COVID started has kept all of our employees relatively safe. And the policies we have in place have been working. Right now with Omicron, we've gone back to how it was at the beginning of the pandemic.
And how is that?
Well, I haven't personally heard of any cases within the city workforce, but we're back to having 50% of those at City Hall. The rest are working from home. So the only groups that are the group that is working all the time are the public works. So we're doing the best we can, and it's working so far.
Yeah, so that's good to hear. It's a topic that you hear at every coffee shop, everywhere you go.
Yeah.
So not picking on the city, just asking the question. The other one is taxation. The ever popular topic of taxation. So you had campaigned on keeping it taxes at the rate of inflation, which is nice in theory, but nobody anticipates things happening. So in the last several years under this new council, taxes have gone up significantly. And it's no longer just a cup of coffee, no longer just, a latte, that type of thing. So how do you square that with the public?
Well, it's a good question. And I've had to think about this pretty long and hard. And I knew when I said that during the campaign to try and keep the taxes close to the rate of inflation, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. But what I hadn't considered, which made it more difficult, was in the 2021 budget, council had kept the tax rate lower than it should have been. And we got hit with the catch-up taxation. So that accounted for probably, I think it was just over 2% that was held back. And that was the decision at the time with, and now we're having to catch up and pay that. Plus, we have a very ambitious infrastructure development plan that I think the tax rate for that was set at 2.2% back whenever it was done, 2018 or I think. So that added on top. So it became pretty obvious to me that the council wasn't really willing to budge off of those items. And it's been mentioned before, and it's not a cop-out, but I am just one vote. And I did my best to keep the rates as low as we could. And I wasn't alone in that. There was at least a couple of other councillors that had very serious concerns about the tax rate. Because back in the day, when you and I were on council, a tax rate anywhere near 4% was like shooting yourself in the back of the head, or if you could reach around. But so for me, these numbers were crazy. Now, since I've been when I was out of politics, I rarely even followed any of this stuff because I had a more peaceful life. But I also know that I own this. And that's not going to satisfy everybody on the explanation. But not everyone lost money during COVID. Not everyone has suffered major changes to their income. And so the other part of this that people are concerned about is the assessed values jumping as much as they have in the last couple of years. Well, what happens is the tax rate gets adjusted to the average increase or the average property value. And we fluctuate the tax rate up and down based on those numbers because we only still need X number of dollars, so that's all we tax for. So if someone's assessment went way up over the average, yeah, they're going to pay a little bit more. If it went down below, they could actually pay a little bit less in actual money. And if they stayed around the medium, then their rates should stay exactly the same.
Yeah,
And
it's funny because I was reading on social media how people equate it with directly to their taxes, and my assessment went up 32%. So
yes.
watch out for us little guys, man.
Well, your house I'm going to mark down, and we're going to find a way to tax it separately.
I designated as a
The Deb rate.
Yeah, the Deb rate, yeah. You know, and it's funny, you know, because in previous years, you're right, we did hold taxes down to a bare minimum because that is what the public wanted us to do.
Yes.
And playing catch up is very hard. So it's a no-win.
And especially when people hear that our infrastructure is starting to decay, they hear across the entire world that infrastructure, pipes in the ground for carrying water. Some communities have lead in the pipes and all kinds of stories we've been hearing. So people are demanding, what are you doing about it? And first of all, people had to figure out the magnitude of the issue, how much money it would take to bring it up to standard, and how much do you set aside for the eventual repair and maintenance of what you fixed, or the replacement, depending on what the life expectancy is. So that's where the asset management plan comes into play. So the city developed that a couple of years ago when they set that infrastructure tax rate. And it's due to get us relatively even by the end of, I think, the next, like in 4 years or so, something like that. So theoretically, the tax rates should stabilize and drop down just a little, but should continue at an even rate from there on. And the beauty of this plan is that unless something unforeseen comes up, which is always a possibility, we should know every year exactly how much money we're going to have, what we can fix next, and it should take away the strain and the political strain that's involved with setting the tax rate.
Okay, what about the ever popular parcel tax? How far are we into that? 8 years? 9 years?
I honestly don't know how long we've been in it, but yeah, I don't really like parcel taxes. It's a regressive tax, but
it was a necessary one at the time, as I defend myself on camera. But you know, you do what you think is best at the time.
Yeah.
And you work with a committee of people that you know, are doing the same thing, doing the best that they can, and it's hard. It's hard stuff.
Yeah, and bottom line, the city, through feedback and our planning, the community decides what they want. And every plan has a lot of improvement ideas, all good ideas. But for every improvement, there needs to be money for it. And if we're going to develop these plans and let them sit on the shelf, we shouldn't have spent the money in the first place. So as I said earlier, all these plans inform the strategic plan on what it is we want to do. Then we throw in the financial plan that says how we're going to pay for it. So everything costs money and nothing is free. Right. It's just trying to manage it without having too much sticker shock is the key. And it's not always possible because there's people who want negative tax rates, people who want no increase,
and no change in service.
And no change in service. And the starting point is the rate of inflation. So it's anywhere from 2 to 3%, depending on who you talk to. But I think the numbers we used are just around 2%. That's right off the start. That used to be all we ever taxed. So if people wonder why things suddenly need repair, that's it.
Yeah.
And councils going back 20, 30 years have all fed into that, keep it as low as possible. Everyone did that. Yeah. And now we're paying.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's happened well across Canada is you try to appease and keep things low, steady as she goes, without having asset management to see the real big picture of what's going to happen and what you unload on another council. And that will happen year to year too.
Yep. And excuse me, this cool air is hard on my lungs. What some people see and what it's, I see it too. When there's improvements made at Millennium Park, they're great improvements, and it's part of that plan for that park and all the parks. But when taxes go up to what they are, you get that side where people say that's a waste of money because you should be doing it on the core stuff. Well, we have to keep a balance, and I know I've used that word many a time before. It's all about balance, because if we stopped improving our parks, the people who use those parks would be the ones calling City Hall, going on social media saying, what are you doing? So we can't completely stop everything. We have to maintain a balance. And some people will like it, some may not. Some it's just purely about the money. But for council, it's not just about the money. We have to set the next council up the best.
And that's a really good thing, because no council wants to come in and have to undo what previous councils have done. It's nice to be able to build on top of it.
Yeah.
Sure. That's a nice thing. And hopefully, going forward, we all get to that point. So another question I have for you is, I'd like to know if the city has any plans to increase the local food security in Castlegar, and what that would look like. With natural disasters increasing and the viability of food transport becoming less stable, I'd like to know my city is actively planning for the possibility of needing to provide a portion of its own food.
Interesting question. And so far, since I've been in office, it hasn't actually come up as a topic of discussion. So I'm not entirely sure what we're doing, but it's an obvious concern. I have heard it previous to this, and everyone talks about it around the world. If the supply chains that bring all the food from all corners of the world stopped today, we would have a tough time going forward. And one of the reasons, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but one of the reasons the agricultural land reserve was originally set up was to protect available farmland for growing of our own food. And yet the province almost every day, or the Agricultural Land Commission, decides and adjudicates every day on land in the reserve that developers want to get out of there, and municipalities, so they can build houses and whatever else. So it's interesting, but that was one of the reasons. That was back in 1972 or 3 when it was set up, and it's still there to this day, but it faces a lot of challenge. But that was one of those reasons, one of those things that was developed to address food security. A lot of orchards get mowed down for subdivisions and houses, as we've seen throughout the Okanagan, but it's a serious issue, and I'm not 100% sure exactly what to do about it on a large scale. I had this discussion with one person in the spring, that they had a garden, a very nice garden in their backyard, and they weren't using all the food it was producing. So she shared it out to her neighbors and other people that needed a spot. So her garden was divided up for different neighbors to make use of it. Great idea for the scale that was being operated at. But if we're going to look at something for our whole area, that's a massive undertaking. And my friend, Councillor Bogle, he's the best one to actually ask that question of, because he has some good insight on food delivery, and so he's quite an interesting guy to talk to about that.
Yeah, I think the world is changing in that everybody wants to be more sustainable in their own communities, and it is a big project and a huge task, more than just getting a plot of land and plant potatoes and carrots.
Yes.
But I think the discussion is an important one to have. And I know there's groups out there that have approached council, and it seems grandiose and stuff in size and scope. But hopefully that discussion can carry on. And,
yes.
Better plans, or not better plans, but other plans that can come together will be presented, and council can work with them on that.
Yep.
Because sustainability, whether it's food or whatever, is really important to
yes, it is.
well-being, and especially in a pandemic. You think, what happens if, and the floods and the everything else that is going on. It's nice to know that we can take care of our own.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. So the other question I have is, Can you ask the mayor, why are we installing all these amenities like bus shelters, garbage cans, etc., that can't be maintained 12 months out of the year?
Well, they should be accessible more than half the year, that's for sure. It's all about getting people out of cars and out of trucks, and when possible, to use public transit. That bus that rolls down the road on Columbia Avenue is one of the most expensive piece of equipment that you'll ever see. So when it goes by, just imagine it encased in gold. Yeah. With a sign that says, you should ride in here because you're paying for this. So it's all about sustainability once again. People, large groups of people do not want us using fossil fuels anymore. So we need to keep advocating for public transit. So building a shelter has never been a bad idea.
Yeah, I think
bus shelter.
Yeah, I think people see the snow pile up and you can't use the bike lanes and stuff. And this goes back to when the first phase was done.
Yeah.
It's a hard balance, removing everything and doing that.
But I certainly commend people that try to ride their bike in the winter. Yeah. Like, I wouldn't be doing it myself, but
I ride my bike in the summer.
When it comes to the winter, the priority goes back to the roadway for the vehicles.
Oh, sure.
And when the Public Works has time, they'll get the sidewalks cleared. And it still may not be perfect spacing for pedestrians and cyclists, but just be careful.
Well, this is another funny thing, an odd thing to ask, but one of the most consistent complaint I've had about the sidewalks in the snow is those that are living outside, living rough, have a hard time pushing their buggies and all of their possessions in there. And it really, really makes it tough for them. And it's a genuine concern because they can't, you can't move.
You can't move around.
You can't leave your stuff. So I
totally get that.
So another person wants to know the housing strategy. Where is it going? What do you think is going to happen? Are you, as the city of Castlegar, corporation of the city council, when are you going to build?
Excuse me. Well, the city itself, meaning people in this building and city council, aren't going to build anything. But what we are going to do is what we've already done, develop the strategy, because let's face it, we all know there's a shortage of all types of housing, all types. So what we're going to do is continue with redeveloping the OCP, the official community plan, revamping the zoning bylaw to make it more flexible, more quicker document to amend when required, so that we can accommodate different proposals for different styles of housing, and to be totally open-eyed and open-minded to any suggestions on how to better utilize a space in terms of its density, style of housing, the whole ball of wax. The real kicker comes in attracting private developers that have money, so they can come in here and do something here, because it doesn't come from government. Government through BC Housing funds affordable housing units and puts money towards like our way out shelter and other issues of people with little to no money. They do a lot of work in that area, but for people who can afford housing, the government's not going to step in, nor should they. But we need a private developer that we can demonstrate the need here and demonstrate that we're trying to be more cost effective for them to set up shop here and attract them to come into this area in a serious way and help alleviate the problem. And because, once again, we're at the point where there isn't really any housing that's available, or very little, it's going to take a couple, 3, maybe 5 years to get our stock up. And contrary to popular opinion, in a lot of circles, you don't start with low-cost affordable housing. You start with housing that middle-income earners can afford to get into. So they move out of the lower-cost housing, get into the higher-cost housing. That opens up the bottom end of the market for people who have less means. Yeah. So and at the same time, we have to address the people that already exist with low income. And so it's kind of a two-pronged attack, but the real philosophy is building at the middle level to get people that can afford it out of the lower cost places.
I think if people really looked at it, they would see the how that makes sense. Unless you're one at the very bottom, you know, right now off the top of my head, I can tell you that we've got 2 women, one with 2 children in hotels right now because they're sleeping in their car.
Yep.
So, so it's hard to explain that to them because
they have immediate needs.
Yeah, and it's not just matter of fact; it's emotional, and it's you know, everything about who you are and where you live.
Even people that have money can't find somewhere to live. Like if you get a job here, you feel great. Oh, this is great. This is wonderful. Then you come here and you can't find anywhere to live, and you actually have to consider giving up what you thought was a great job opportunity. And that is a really bad situation. But so there's all kinds of issues with that, but I agree. The people who can't find anything, either because there isn't anything or they don't have enough money to get into what is available, that's definitely an immediate issue. And it's hard. I agree with you. It's hard to look at someone in the eyes and say, I don't know what to say to you.
Yeah. Well, Kirk, I think that's about all the time we have today. As usual, it's been very informative. I want to thank you for coming on and giving your answers to the questions that I didn't let you see before. And just being honest and open about it and caring about your community. So on behalf of myself, I want to thank you and your fellow councillors for doing the job that they do. And of course, for all the city staff for keeping us safe.
You're welcome, Deb, and thank you for doing this type of a program.